At 11:42 in the morning, the Korean looked calm. The sea was flat. The sky was clear. Visibility stretched for miles in every direction. No storms, no warnings. Just another quiet patrol in international waters. But within the next 37 minutes, a single decision would erase an entire navy from the map. And it started with a gun turning sideways. 70 miles north of the Venezuelan coastline, the United States Coast Guard cutter USCGC Stone moved steadily through blue water. A white hull, red stripe, law enforcement markings clearly visible. This was not a warship looking for a fight. On board were 29 Coast Guard men and women conducting a routine counter-narcotics patrol. The mission was simple: intercept drug trafficking routes before cocaine shipments reached North America. The Caribbean corridor moves tons of narcotics every month. This is where the Coast Guard quietly does some of its most dangerous work. No headlines, no cameras, just long hours and open water. At this moment, nothing felt unusual, until a radar contact appeared on Stone's display. Not a speedboat, not a fishing vessel, a warship. At first, it was just a blip moving fast for the south. Then the identification resolved. Venezuelan Navy, frigate class. The Almirante Bayan, one of the most heavily armed surface combatants Venezuela had left. And it was heading directly toward the Coast Guard cutter. On the bridge of Stone, Captain Jennifer Hayes studied the contact. She had seen aggressive maneuvers before: posturing, shadowing, radio harassment. But this approach was different. The frigate was closing fast. At 11:40 a.m., the radio crackled to life on an emergency maritime frequency. American vessel, you are operating in Venezuelan waters. Stop your engines immediately. Captain Hayes didn't hesitate. This is United States Coast Guard cutter Stone. We are operating in international waters. Your claim is invalid. You have no authority here. There was a pause. Then the reply came back colder. This is your final warning. Stop now or face military action. On the Venezuelan frigate, combat stations were being manned. The ship altered course slightly, angling broadside. That was the moment every sailor on Stone felt it. This wasn't harassment. This was escalation. At 11:42 a.m., the Almirante Bayan turned fully sideways. Its 76mm naval gun elevated and aimed directly at a U.S. Coast Guard cutter. Captain Hayes immediately activated the emergency beacon. Mayday, Mayday, this is USCGC Stone. Venezuelan warship has weapons trained on us. Request immediate assistance. The signal went out. 80 miles away, it was received instantly. But before any response could arrive, at 11:44 a.m., the Venezuelan commander made a decision that would destroy his navy. The gun fired. The first shell slammed into the water 50 yards off Stone's bow, throwing a towering wall of spray into the air. The second landed near the stern. The third hit even closer. This was not a warning maneuver. This was an attack. Alarms screamed across Stone. Crew members hit the deck. Damage control teams moved into position. The cutter had no armor, no anti-ship missiles, no chance in a direct fight. Captain Hayes grabbed the radio again. Cease fire immediately. You are firing on a United States vessel. This is an act of war. The Venezuelan reply was short. Leave our waters or the next rounds will hit your ship. Then the gun fired again. 4 more shells. One passed directly over the bridge, close enough for the shockwave to rattle windows and ears. The sound cracked like thunder. Everyone on board knew exactly how close they had come to dying. On Stone, there was nowhere to hide. But what the Venezuelan commander didn't realize was that his first shot had already sealed his fate. Because attacking a U.S. Coast Guard cutter triggers something immediate, automatic, unforgiving. At 11:46 a.m., aboard the aircraft carrier, USS George H.W. Bush, Admiral Marcus Reynolds received the mayday. There was no debate, no delay. A Coast Guard vessel had been fired upon. Rules of engagement were clear. Weapons free. Launch strike package. Destroy the attacking vessel. Neutralize Venezuelan naval capability. 4 FA-18 Super Hornets already airborne on combat air patrol received the order. They didn't ask questions. They turned south. At 11:48 a.m., targeting data locked onto the Almirante Bayonne 8 AGM-84. Harpoon anti-ship missiles dropped from their wings and ignited. Sea skimming, radar guided, designed to kill warships. On the Venezuelan frigate, alarms suddenly blared. Missile launch detected. The crew scrambled. Chaff deployed. Evasive maneuvers attempted. It didn't matter. At 11:50 a.m., the first missile hit. It struck the forward gun mount, the very weapon that had fired on Stone. The explosion ripped the turret apart instantly. The second and third missiles slammed into the hull amidships. Steel peeled open. Fires erupted. Compartments flooded. The fourth missile punched into the engine room. Power died. The ship slowed. Then the remaining missiles hit. Overkill. Flames engulfed the frigate. Thick black smoke poured into the sky. The vessel began listing hard to starboard. At 11:52 a.m., less than 2 minutes after impact, the Almirante Bayonne rolled over and sank. Venezuela's most capable warship vanished beneath the surface. 180 sailors were thrown into the water. And the response didn't stop there, because the second catastrophic mistake Venezuela made was assuming this would be limited. It never is. While the harpoons were still inbound, the carrier launched more aircraft. 12 additional Super Hornets armed with precision munitions. Their mission was simple: erase Venezuela's naval infrastructure. At the same time, 2 U.S. Navy destroyers escorting the carrier opened their vertical launch systems. 48 Tomahawk cruise missiles climbed into the sky. Targets were already programmed: naval command centers, coastal radar sites, ammunition depots. At 11:55 a.m., Venezuelan military headquarters began receiving panicked reports. The flagship was gone. American aircraft were inbound. Missiles were detected. There was no time to react. At 11:58 a.m., U.S. aircraft reached the Venezuelan coastline. Precision bombs fell on Puerto Cabello Naval Base, the heart of Venezuela's fleet. Piers shattered. Patrol boats were destroyed, where they sat tied to docks. Fuel storage tanks erupted into massive fireballs. Command buildings collapsed. Minutes later, Punto Fallo Naval Station was hit. A submarine pen caved in, crushing the vessel inside. Radar arrays vanished. Maintenance facilities were flattened. Air defenses were wiped out before they could fire. Then the Tomahawks arrived. At 12:04 p.m., cruise missiles struck Caracas. The Naval Command Center ceased to exist. Communications went silent. Radar coverage went dark. Coordination collapsed. Within minutes, Venezuela no longer had a functioning navy. At 12:08 p.m., U.S. Navy MH-60R Seahawk helicopters launched from the carrier. Their mission was not attack. It was rescue. They flew to the sinking site of the frigate. Dozens of Venezuelan sailors clung to debris in the water. Some were injured. Some were exhausted. American crews lowered rescue swimmers anyway. 53 survivors were pulled from the sea, given medical treatment, fed, stabilized, because that is how it always ends. At 12:19 p.m., the operation was complete. 37 minutes after firing on a Coast Guard cutter, Venezuela had lost its flagship frigate, 4 patrol boats, a submarine, 2 major naval bases, its naval command center, over 300 casualties. The United States lost nothing. USCGC Stone continued its patrol. All 29 crew members unharmed. The sea returned to calm, and the message was unmistakable: The United States Coast Guard is not alone. Fire on one American ship, even a white-hulled cutter, and the response will be total, immediate, and final. This is not a story about aggression. It is a story about consequences. At 11:42 a.m., Venezuela fired on a U.S. vessel. At 12:19 p.m., Venezuela no longer had a navy. And the same forces that destroyed it still rescued the survivors. Because that is American doctrine. Defend your ships. End the threat. Then save every life you can. Never confuse restraint with weakness.